Hello and welcome to Strategy classes. To begin with the second session of our Indian economy section, we will see what will we look through during this next half an hour or 45 minutes discussion regarding Indian economy. Today we will deal with some of the technical terms. In the first session we understood what economy is, what are the basic terms of economy, how economy functions. We will now look into some of the technical aspects, like some of the heavy technical terms such as your GDP. Currently in news, almost every other day GDP remains in news. Related to GDP, we will also discuss GNP, NNP. Also, we will see how GDP is calculated, what are the various ways to calculate GDP, how can we calculate. There are mainly three various ways to calculate GDP. We will discuss all of them one by one. Also, we will look into what is purchasing power parity and where India stand in case of purchasing power parity. Also, we will take a look at the various types of goods available in the market and what is known as middle income trap. Middle income trap currently in news because of the rising of middle class, and the middle class cannot be converted into bourgeoisie class. Like the poor gets uplifted to the middle class section, poor bandwidth, then comes the middle class bandwidth. However, suppose this is an income timeline. If you are lying somewhere here, you are poor. This is the middle class and this is the rich class. So the poor gets uplifted to middle class, but the middle class cannot be converted into the rich class or the bourgeoisie class. It keeps on rising, the fattening, the margins has been pushed to left and as well as right, because some of the rich class persons have also come into middle class section. But as the middle class section is fattening, that is a serious problem because we are losing our bourgeoisie class. We are not being able to convert the middle class into the bourgeoisie or the rich class. So this is a rising problem in India, the fattening of the middle class bandwidth. So that is called as middle income trap. So we will look into it one by one. So let's begin. First of all, let's take a look at what are the types of goods available. There are mainly three types of goods. Those are, one is consumer, another one is your intermediate goods, and another one is your capital goods. Consumer goods are those goods that are available directly for consumption of the customer. You just buy it and consume it. Intermediate goods are those goods that are helpful in that goes into factory. In the previous session, in the first chapter, while discussing introduction to economics, we discussed about the primary sector, the secondary sector, the tertiary sector. Consumer goods mainly will find it in the tertiary sector, mostly, not always. Remember, in UPSC there is nothing called as always, because nothing is perfectly fine. So mostly you will find consumer goods in tertiary sector, intermediate goods in secondary sector, and capital goods mostly you will find capital goods in all the three: primary, secondary, tertiary. Let me give you an example. Hospitality industry. Hospitality industry means your hotels, your tourisms. Mostly we will consider your hotels. So you are going to restaurants, you are having your dinner, you are having your lunch sorted out there, right? So restaurant, what is a restaurant? It is a tertiary sector. It provides service to you. The food which is being served to you is directly consumed by you. Food is a tangible good which you consume, and The waiter which deals with you, the service provided by the waiter, the persons, the manager and all who provides you the service, that which you can feel like, okay, yes, that waiter is a very nice and humble person, right? Well mannered, well behaved person. So these are the things which you feel like, yes, this waiter is good. That hospitality of that restaurant is good. Let's go there. So that behavior, that manner, those are all said to be intangible good, and you are also directly consuming it. The intangible good created by the tertiary sector is directly consumed by the consumer, right? So hotel restaurants comprise in the tertiary sector, but the restaurant which prepares the food, the final food for consumption, gets some intermediate goods or intermediate food products like your masalas, the spices and all from the factories, isn't it? From the food processing industries. Had there been no food processing industries, from where the restaurant should have got those goods, the intermediate goods? So these factories and the food processing industries, they prepare these intermediate goods. To prepare these intermediate goods, they depend upon capital goods, and capital goods could be in their own factories, like machines might be there for large scale production of spices, isn't it? So the investment done in those machines in the factories, also machines are also a part of capital goods, as well as the raw materials, the cumin, the and everything, the spices, the products that are being utilized for producing masalas and spices, they procure it directly from the agrarian sector, from the agricultural fields, farmers. So for them, they are also capital goods, cumins, spices and all. Okay. So these are the differences between consumer goods, intermediate goods and capital goods. Let's deal it with detail. Consumer goods, the definition stands at all goods and services. Goods are tangible in nature and your services are intangible in nature. The food which you are eating is tangible in nature. The behavior or the manner of the waiter that impressed you, it is intangible in nature. That is, it can only be felt. It cannot be touched. The good can be touched, tangible. It is all goods and services used for final satisfaction of customers or consumers are called as consumer goods. Final satisfaction, the ultimate destination, the final destination. These goods can be tangible or intangible goods. They can be both the consumer goods. And what about intermediate goods? All those goods and services which are often used for further production of goods and services that get adjusted during the production process are called intermediate goods. For example, your spices, as I have told you, that spices are tangible goods. They are utilized for further production of goods and services by the hospitality industry. The hospitality industry utilizes the spices in order to prepare food and serve it to the customer, in order to prepare the consumer goods. Therefore, they can be called as your intermediate goods. They are helpful in further production process, right? So what are some of the examples? Petrol in the car can also be an example of intermediate goods. And also markers, those are utilized for teaching purposes in whiteboards. They can also be called as your intermediate goods. Capital goods, all those goods which are used for further production for a long period of time are called capital goods. For a long period of time, further production for a long period of time, then they are called as capital goods. As I have told you, the machines and tools utilized in factories for production and manufacturing industries, right? So they are called as capital goods. Moving on, we will now see the middle income trap. Let me show you a graph here. This is a cyclical graph. In this graph, you can see this, if this is GDP and this is time, you can see that GDP with time, GDP rises, then it reaches its peak. After reaching its peak, GDP slowly starts declining. This phase is called as slowdown. This is known as slowdown. Slowdown for continuously 2 quarters. Remember that slowdown for continuously consecutively 2 quarters gets you into recession. Age of 2020-2021, the third quarter, that is the December-January months, you will witness that India is under technical recession after consecutive negative growth rate for consecutive 2 quarters. India could be said to be in technical recession. India is in recession, and it is a great news because India has shown negative growth rate for consecutive 2 quarters. In the first quarter of financial year 21, that is the 2021, India witnessed a negative growth rate of minus 23%, and in the second quarter it followed by minus 9%. So Indian economy is said to be shrinking and we are into technical recession. What will come after recession? You will find the peak point here. This is the point of depression. You might have heard about the Great Depression of 1930s, 1929 to 32, where the hopes and aspirations of capital class or the bourgeoisie class got a head on there, and all the capitalistic states converted themselves into welfare states. From true capitalism, they converted themselves into welfare states. We will look into that during our life classes in detail. So this is the depression. After depression, slowly the economy will recover. This is the cycle of any economy. So now we will look into middle income trap. What is middle income trap? As I have told you, being trapped in a particular bandwidth of income, like we have most of our population in the as middle class. India's middle class is rising, it is widening. The bourgeoisie class gets converted into middle class, the poor gets leveraged up to the middle class, but the middle class cannot be converted into bourgeoisie or the rich class. That's the main problem in Indian sector. Why is that happening? Why is this middle income trap is a headache for the Indian economy right now, and how is it happening? What are the causes of middle income trap? Domestic consumption is going less. As I have told you in the earlier section, the introduction to economics, that India is a demand driven economy. Indian economy runs through the high demand the nation poses because of its greater population. We stand next to China, and it is projected that in the coming 10 years we will be beating China in case of population. So domestic consumption, that demand, if there is population, huge population, at least they will consume something to keep them alive. So the demand is always at peak. The demand is always high in Indian market, and Indian economy is nothing but a demand driven economy. You spend, you survive. You don't spend, you perish. That is the concept. You consume, that means you spend from your pocket, then only you can survive, and if you are not spending, then you will be a failure. That is a negative aspect of saying of demand driven economy. So domestic consumption in India is going less because of the various factors such as your GST, your demonetization. So these led into decrease in the income of middle class, the middle class businessmen and all. With a decrease in income, the domestic spending also decreased, consumption also decreased. That is the one for the first point, the first cause, that domestic consumption is going less. The second is production of manufacturing sector is less. Definitely it will happen if there is no consumption in the market, no one to buy your product. Why will you create the product? Why will you manufacture the product? If I am manufacturing 5 shoes, suppose I am manufacturing 5 shoes. Previously the demand was for 10 shoes. Hence I increase my potential to 7 shoes. Now the demand is only for 2 shoes. Then will I be producing 7 shoes? I will be in a dire state of financial condition. I will be in complete loss if I will be producing 7 shoes when the demand is only for 2 shoes. Therefore, I will also be producing only 2 shoes. I will decrease my production. That is the case in the manufacturing sector. As domestic consumption is going less, production of the manufacturing sector is also less. As production in the manufacturing sector is getting less, our exports are also decreasing. If there will be no manufacturing good in your nation, in your pocket, there will be no goods in your godowns, then what will you export outside? Because your manufacturers are not manufacturing, fearing that export is not a reliable thing, domestic market is a reliable thing, fearing that it will not be sold, we will be into losses. And if they are not manufacturing, then what will you export? So these are the 3 causes of the middle income trap. How to come out of it? Productivity must increase. Your manufacturing productivity, the productivity of the manufacturing sector must increase. We must establish ourselves from a demand driven economy to an export based economy. Just few seconds later, I told that exports are not reliable. The manufacturing sector cannot rely on India's capability of exports. So we must induce in the manufacturing sector a reliability that your products would be exported. So we must establish our economy from a demand driven economy or a consumption based economy to an export oriented economy. And also domestic consumption, that is demand, must increase. Domestic consumption must increase in order to come out of the recession phase or the middle income trap. Now we will understand the GDP, the technical aspect, the GDP. What is GDP? All the goods and services that are produced inside the territorial boundary of a particular nation during one financial year is called as GDP. Production of goods and services inside the boundary of a nation during one financial year is called as your GDP. Suppose this is India. All the goods and services, that's manufactured goods, the capital goods, intermediate goods, tertiary goods, consumption goods, services, tangible, intangible, everything, all the goods and services that are produced inside the Indian territory in one financial year is termed as gross domestic product of that nation. This production is done both by foreigners and Indians as well. Like, you will ask how? Suppose Hyundai. Let's take an example of Hyundai. Hyundai is a South Korean company. Hyundai established a manufacturing plant at Noida. Let's suppose Hyundai established a manufacturing plant at Noida. It will employ some person. Suppose it employed 10,000 employees. All these 10,000 employees will be Indians. So, the production done by Hyundai Noida sector plant in India would be considered as the GDP of India. No doubt it is a foreign nation, it will take its profits to its nation, but all those manufactured products and services generated by it, by Hyundai in India, will be considered under GDP of India. So GDP can be differentiated into gross means total, domestic denotes the economic territory, the territorial access of a particular nation. Economic territory, we have discussed that in previous section, that a set of legislations with an institution to implement those legislation, right? And product means your goods and services. GDP focuses on where the output is produced. It does not focus on who produces, how produces, nothing. Where the output is produced. Just like Hyundai, it is not an Indian company, but if it is producing, if it is manufacturing its products inside the economic territory of India, then its production would be calculated as GDP of India, right? So GDP can be divided into two. One is your nominal GDP or the NGDP. Another one is your real GDP. What is the difference between these two, nominal GDP and real GDP? Nominal GDP is the value of goods and services when it is calculated at current market price. Suppose you are buying, let's take an example. You went to the market and you bought 1 kg of apple. You went to the market, you bought 1 kg of apple at rupees 150. So, what would be the NGDP? NGDP would be 1 into 150 is equals to 150 rupees. 1 kg quantity of goods into the current market price. That means when you are buying the product, the price of the product at that particular time, it might be any year, that particular time the price would be considered. That is the current market price. The current market price into the current quantity will give your nominal GDP. Now what is real GDP? Real GDP is the evaluation of goods and services where the value adjustment is being done depending on inflation. Real GDP is equals to, let's take an example first of all, same example, 1 kg apple. You bought today at rupees 150. So what will be the RGDP? Now this 1 kg of another condition is there. This 1 kg apple, if you would have bought it in 2011-12, then it would have cost you rupees 100. In the past 10 years, 50 rupees it arose because of inflation, and during the ongoing COVID pandemic, food inflation is at an all-time high. In the last 6 years, food inflation is more than 7%. So, food inflation has increased during pandemic. So, the rupees 100, 1 kg of apple which was being available for 100 rupees during 11-12 is now available at rupees 150, and you bought 1 kg of apple. So what would be the real GDP? Real GDP is equals to 1 kg quantity of good into 100. That is rupees 100 would be your real GDP. Why? Because it is the price of the base year. In real GDP, the price of current year is not taken into consideration. Rather, the price of your base year is taken into consideration. So, real GDP is equals to rupees 100. The current base year lies at 2011-12. Recent recommendations have been provided to make 2020 and 21 as the next base year for calculating real GDP. So real GDP, the formula is base year price into current quantity. Base year, what is base year? Base year is that year in which we compare the prices of the goods with the current year. Like you are comparing the prices of goods at present with that of 2011-12. That is, you are comparing the prices of current year with the base year. As simple as that. Now we will look what is deflator. Deflator is a measurement of inflation. You can also call it as proxy to inflation. It helps in calculating inflation. How? Look at deflator. What is deflator? Nominal GDP upon real GDP. What was nominal GDP? Current quantity into current price. What was real GDP? Current quantity into base year price, right? Current quantity into current price upon current quantity into base year price. So current quantity get cancelled. So current price upon base year price. Will this not indicate how much inflation has been occurred throughout the term? As considering our example, we took that in current price the 1 kg of apple was costing 150. In base year price it was costing rupees 100. So will this not denote the rate of increase of prices, the increment in prices that happened from base year to till date? And what is inflation? Increase in the prices of goods and services is nothing but inflation. So therefore, doesn't it denote inflation in that particular 1 kg of apple? So therefore, deflator is known as proxy to inflation. Remember this. Now we will find out GDP at factor cost. GDP at factor cost. It defines the price of good when it is available at the factory gate, excluding the taxes to wholesaler or consumer. Factory procured raw material, produced the goods, and the good that is available at the factory gate, at the exit gate of the factory, that particular price when taken into account for calculation of GDP, means GDP is nothing but quantity into price. So quantity is taken and the price of that particular price available at the exit gate of the factory is taken into consideration, then this would be said as GDP at factor cost, right? Because when GDP, what is GDP as market cost? We will take into account that, we will look into it. GDP at market cost. GDP at market cost is nothing but GDP at factor cost plus tax, that are the taxes imposed by the government, as well as minus subsidies. The subsidies as well are also provided by the government. The value at which the good is available to the consumer, including taxes and subsidies. Suppose there is a good where 10% tax exists and rupees 5 is the subsidized amount. Then if that is available for rupees 100 at factory gate, then your 10% tax is rupees 10 minus rupees 5 as subsidy. It is available to the consumer at rupees 105. And if a consumer buys 1 kg of it, then the GDP contribution is rupees 105. And for 1 kg of this good, what is the GDP at factor cost? This one is GDP at market cost. What will be the GDP at factor cost? 1 kg into 100, because this is the price available at the factory gate 100, then it would be 100. GDP at factor cost would be 100. So you might be thinking that GDP at market cost is always more than GDP at factor cost. No, that is not always. If the subsidies are more, let's suppose the subsidy in this case is 15, then it would be rupees 95. It would not be rupees 105, rather it would be rupees 95, and it will be less than GDP at factor cost. GDP at market cost will be less than GDP at factor cost. It depends upon that value of tax and subsidies. How can we calculate GDP? Three widely used methods are present in order to calculate GDP. One is your income method, another one is your expenditure method, the other one is your GVA or the gross value addition method. Income method, it is not preferred in India, it is a US based model. Why? Because India's economy rests on unorganized sectors. India's economy is widely scattered into unorganized sector. We don't have that much organized sector in order to take into account the income method. Therefore, we rely upon the expenditure method to calculate GDP. GVA is nothing but your gross value addition. How much value is added, the total value added to a particular raw material is known as GVA, and GVA method is utilized as one of the methods in order to calculate GDP. Now let's take a look of the income method. It is not a preferred mode of calculating GDP in India because of high scattering of unorganized sector in Indian economy. We always witness unorganized sector. Your street vendors and all, are they come under organized sector? No, your street vendors are unorganized sector of Indian economy, right? Moving on, expenditure method. This is the most important method because India follows expenditure method in order to calculate its GDP. So the formula for calculating GDP under expenditure method includes GDP equals to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. You have to remember it. The total consumption happened inside the Indian territory is taken into account. The total investment that has been done inside the Indian territory is taken into account, but out of the investment only capital investment would be taken into account. If the investments done in the stock market does not lead into any type of capital production, that means it did not garner into creating jobs or creating employees, and if it did not help in procuring any of the tangible or intangible goods like purchasing your machines for factories and all, then it would not be considered as your capital investment, and it would not be utilized for your GDP calculation. When investment results in new job creation, when investment results in procuring of machineries, then only that will be termed as capital investment, and it would be calculated under GDP. Next is government spending. What amount of money the government spent, it would be calculated, and what were the exports done by India to the foreign markets will be taken into account, minus the imports. It is the balance sheet of export minus import. How much we are providing to the world, how much we are buying from the world. So this will lead to the calculation of our GDP, and we follow this method in order to calculate GDP of India. Two exceptions. In the investment done by companies, In the investment done by companies, the stock investment is not calculated if it is not leading to production of any goods and services, as I was saying to you, that it would not be calculated if it does not lead to production of any particular goods and services. And another exception in case of your government spending, the transfer of payments, the TOPs, the transfer of payments done due to the cause of subsidies are not calculated as it is not leading to production of any goods and services. The transfer of payments that are done on ground of subsidies would not be calculated because it is not directly involved. It is not directly involved in production of any new goods and services. Government provides you through DBT, direct benefit transfer. What is transfer of payment? What is transfer of payment? Transfer of payment occurs through DBT, direct benefit transfer. So through direct benefit transfer, when government provides you money into your account, is it generating any new tangible goods and services? The answer is no, it is not generating any tangible goods and services. Now what is GVA method? GVA stands for gross value addition. Gross value addition. Let's suppose this is a factory, right? Factory got some raw materials from the market. Now factory will produce some output. It will add some value to this output. This will be finished goods. Factory will take into raw material from outside, procure raw material and will provide finished goods. So it added some value to the raw material in order to provide the finished goods. So that value addition to the raw material is known as gross value addition. It is GVA is equals to output value minus your input value. Let's suppose wheat. Wheat is procured by the factory at rupees 100 per kg. Now atta, right? Atta comes at rupees, wheat flour atta comes at rupees 150 per kg. Let's suppose. So what is the gross value added here? Rupees 50 will come as your GDP as per GVA method. Output value 150 minus input value, it is 100. Similarly, GVA summation of GVA of all sectors would give you the GDP of the nation. Now what is the difference between GVA and GDP? GVA always gives performance of individual sectors. Individual. Remember it. GVA always gives performance of individual sectors, whereas GDP never provides any insight regarding performance of individual sector. GDP never provides any insight regarding performance of individual sector. GVA is sector specific, sectoral in nature and provides the productivity rate of a particular sector because it is sector specific, whereas on the other hand GDP is not sector specific and it does not provide any information about a particular sector. GVA is always calculated from the producer side, whereas GDP is always calculated from consumer side. GVA from the supplier, producer side and GDP from the consumer side. A basic difference. Now question comes, what is green GDP? Recent terminology, green GDP. Green GDP is nothing but an index of economic growth with environmental conservation. What is the term that is missing from here? Economic growth with environmental conservation is nothing but your sustainable development. So, sustainable development, calculation of sustainable development is your green GDP. Green GDP is equals to GDP minus loss of biodiversity. That is called as your green GDP. Now let's move on to NDP. What is NDP? We saw about GDP, its definitions, the types of GDP, the methods of calculating GDP. Now let's take a look at net domestic product, that is the NDP. It is considered as the purest form of GDP. NDP is considered as the purest form of GDP. How is calculated? NDP is calculated by this formula which says NDP is equals to GDP minus depreciation. What is depreciation? Decrease in value of goods and services over a period of time. It's called as depreciation. You bought a bike. Today you bought a bike for, let's say, rupees 1 lakh. You bought a bike for 1 lakh. After 5 years, if you will sell it in the market, will you be able to sell it in 1 lakh? Its price will decrease to 50,000. So this decrease in prices over a period of time of the goods and services is called depreciation. So GDP minus depreciation will give you NDP, that is the net domestic product. Ministry of Commerce and Industry calculates NDP and publish the rates of NDP. This is factual and you need to remember it. It might come in your prelims. Ministry of Commerce and Industry calculates NDP and publish the rates of NDP. GDP is always higher than NDP. Definitely, because depreciation is subtracted from GDP. Therefore, GDP would always remain higher than NDP. No doubt about it, right? What is GNP? GNP is gross national product. GNP includes GDP plus NFIA. What is NFIA? Net factor income from abroad. Net factor income from abroad is considered as your NFIA, and GDP is always less than GNP. GDP is always greater than NDP, and GDP is always less than GNP. Remember these relations. These are important for you from your exam point of view. Now let's come to NFIA. What is net factor income from abroad? Factor income. What are the factors? If you will attend our live classes, you will understand that there are 4 factors of production: wages, rent, investment, and profit. These are the 4 factors of production. So the income generated by Indian nationals in foreign land. Suppose let's take Tata Sons. Tata Sons Private Limited has brought Jaguar. Jaguar was an UK brand. Tata brought Jaguar cars. Jaguar is located at UK. So the profit that Tata gets from this plant of UK would be considered as your NFIA. Tata has invested. Tata Group has invested in Jaguar and it bought Jaguar of UK, and now all the profits that are being generated or the income that the Tata Group derive from this particular factory would be considered as your NFIA, that is the net factor income from abroad. It is coming from UK to India. So net factor income from abroad, and it is will be calculated under GNP. And remember one thing, remittances are not a part of NFIA. Remember one thing, if anyone says that remittances is a part of NFIA, then don't go by it, because remittances are never ever a part of NFIA. Now what is NNP? Net National Product. It is nothing but GNP minus depreciation. What was NDP? What was NDP? NDP equal to GDP minus depreciation. Similarly, NNP is equals to GNP minus depreciation. Now per capita income. Per capita income is what is the income done by a single head, by a single person, per capita, per person, the income of Indians per person. That is the average income of India, right? So it is calculated, the per capita income is calculated as NNP, that is the net national product upon total population. This will give you the per capita income. Now we will look into purchasing power parity. What is meant by purchasing power parity? Triple P, purchasing power parity, indicates the capacity of buying the same basket of goods in any country with same amount of currency in hand. Purchasing power parity denotes the amount of capacity of buying the same basket of goods in any country with same amount of currency in hand. India is standing at third position in terms of GDP at triple P. USA is at first and India is at third in terms of GDP at triple P. How to determine triple P? Purchase. What do you mean by triple P? Purchasing power parity. Let's consider $1 is equals to rupees 70. Now, if you buy 1 kg of apple in USA, it will cost you $1. And if that same kg of apple, if you are buying in India, then it will cost you rupees 70. Then both are equal. Both are equal. That is the purchasing power parity. So India stands at, no, I am sorry. If you are being able to buy it at rupee 1 only, this is not considered as the conversion rate, nominal exchange rate, real exchange rate. They will not play a factor in triple P. If $1, 1 kg of apple, then 1 rupee, 1 kg of apple. If that is happening, then your triple P ranks will be higher. Therefore, it is said that it is cheaper to live in India. Indian lifestyle is cheaper in nature. So with